I'm sure most of us are familiar with the trolley problem. In this famous example, there is a trolley and you have the ability to divert it on its two paths. So on one path, the current path is going to run over five people on a track. On the other track, there is one person. But in order for the trolley to move onto the other track, you have to be the one to pull the lever. Now, the question asks, would you pull the lever? And I think this question is commonly understood through utilitarian ethics, especially it's justified to kill the one for the five because in order to maximize the most amount of pleasure and reduce the most amount of pain, it is reasonable to kill one person to save five people. Let's say that one person is someone like your brother or your mother. When tasked with diverting the trolley's course, hopefully you'd feel some hesitation. But is this a failure of moral calculus? Nell Noddings' Ethics of Care in her book Caring, a Feminine Approach to Ethics and Moral Education can best explain this indecision that we feel. Now, the base of the theory, care ontology, is the idea that the base of human existence is built on relations. We do not form relations as something separate, which enriches our existence, but we form relations because relationships are our being. So from birth, we are in a relationship with a caregiver. From first conception, we are, I guess, tied to a relationship. And our survival and development relies on our attachment to our caregiver. But she also says a natural follow-on from that is we all have an innate desire to care and be cared for, and we have a capacity to care and be cared for by others. Now that we understand that essentially our existence is characterized by our relationships and our relations to others, how does Noddings define a caring relationship? So, in this relationship, both parties participate. Noddings creates the term one caring and cared for to better distinguish between the two roles in this relationship. So, for the one caring, there are a few conditions for care to develop and sustain itself, as caring is an attitude and an action. So, a common, I guess, phrase that you would see in her book is this I must. And it sort of forms from when a fundamental base is formed, is instinctive for you to want to act on your care or your attachment to another person. So, in order to, I guess, build this base, to build this attitude and the foundation for future caring actions, the first step is that we must be engrossed in the other person. And she specifically defines engrossment as you must feel the other's reality as the possibility for your own. So this means being receptive to another person's world, and it allows for you to, I guess, bridge between the two people and understand the other person. Now, since I just said understand the other person, this may come off or I guess resemble empathy, but Nodding describes something a little different from empathy. So when we think of empathy, we think of, I guess, finding the emotions to sympathize with another person. So you hear the common phrase, putting yourself in another person's shoes. But Noddings wants us to do something more intuitive and sentimental. Because when we put ourselves into another's shoes, we find that we're not really experiencing the world from their lens as much as we should. When we put ourselves in their shoes, we ask ourselves, how would I feel if I was in this moment? But the issue is that care doesn't necessarily have a spot for you to impose your worldview onto another person. In fact, that's actually looked down upon. What care requires of you is to absorb another person's worldview as your own. So when you are engrossed in someone, you are receptive to another's world, you are reflective, and you are, I guess, making active attempts to understand the other person through their lens and not through a lens that you only understand. So the first condition for how care develops is that we're engrossed in the other person. We make an active attempt to understand that person through their worldview alone. And next, the second condition is what she describes as motivational displacement. So your own motivations and projects temporarily recede and the cared for's motivations and projects take their place. So, if you are in a position of care and you're caring for another person, this means that your goals, your maybe desires are second to the person that you're caring for. So, a good example is think of a teacher celebrating when their student surpasses them in the domain that they taught them in. This is motivational displacement because, again, a teacher, they understand that their work is, I guess, work not necessarily completed in the student, but it's working within the student. They have passed most of their knowledge into the student, and they are happier that their student knows more than them because they've taught them well. So, to summarize, the two conditions for care are engrossment. Think of engrossment as receptive, the way that you open yourself up to others and how others are able to open up to you. And then the second condition is motivational displacement, which is the active consequence of being receptive to another person. Now, in terms of how we go about caring, as in the action, not the attitude, you don't understand the person logically by mapping your beliefs onto theirs. You're receptive and you sort of absorb the person's feeling rather than imposing your reaction. So, caring is reflective and it's responsive. Your attitude is important when exercising acts of care. Because if you approach someone with genuine care, if you're receptive to them, and if you truly, I guess, believe and want their success as if it's your own, then the person who's cared for can sense it and feel something is completed within them. Now, given that we've outlined these two prior conditions towards caring, and we've, I guess, identified that care is fundamentally developed from a sentimental, emotional, intuitive base, this doesn't mean that there exists no logic in this act of caring. Specifically in Nodding's, I guess, argument against Kantian framework of moral duty, think of his version of I must. Her version of I must is different because you don't care for someone because they specifically align with a principle. So, for instance, Kant, in his theory, people cannot be treated as a means to an end, but within Nodding's framework, that sort of systematizes the individual. You don't essentially care for the person because you have a relationship to them, but because you're like logically obliged based on your set of moral, logical principles. And Noddings makes the argument that this isn't precise. It does not allow for you to act with the best interests of the person in mind because it would be sort of superficial. You do the right thing, perhaps maybe for the approval of others and not for the better of the person you're trying to help. Now, while she critiques the use of principles in finding your obligation to help others, this doesn't mean that logic is absent in the act of caring. While logic is not the initial force which care fundamentally develops from, it's necessary to express your care to the other person through a keen understanding of the other person's needs. Now, the first way that you would understand this person is again being receptive. But once you understand their needs, it's important to work within this situation by, applying logic as sort of a supplement to caring for the other person. So imagine uh, you have a sick child. In that situation, yes, you should use medical principles to help out your child's illness. This means that, the application of logic is not inherently insincere. It should be second to your sentimental base towards caring. So to go back over, I guess, the I must that we speak of, Nodding makes a specific point over whether caring is instinctual, but she claims it isn't. So, while again, due to care ontology, each person has the instinctual and innate capacity to be cared for and to care for others. We instinctually move to help those that we care for, but The specific process of forming a care is not instinct. It requires reflection. So we must look at ourselves within this relationship and question whether we truly feel a desire to understand the other and if we are genuine in our acts. And now that we understand what caring is from the perspective of the cared for, we can discuss how caring enriches and develops the one caring. Noddings outlines this idea in her concept of the ethical self and ethical ideal. So while I am caring for someone, this being, I am engrossed in the other, and there is a shift of my energies towards the other and their needs and goals. I form a picture of myself. This is the ethical ideal. I see myself as a person capable of caring for another person and being cared for. Now, the ethical self is an active relation between myself as I am currently and the vision of my ideal self. I envision myself as one caring and as a cared for, and by caring, this ethical ideal is something that I reach for. It's who I become by practicing caring and being cared for. When I understand this capacity, I become able to care for myself, and this is how we grow. Now, the cared for must also act to sustain the caring relationship. To sustain this relationship, the one whose caring's actions must be completed in the other person, and the one being cared for must be receptive to these acts. So the cared for has three responsibilities. One is to acknowledge and respond to present engrossment. For instance, if a mother is worried, the cared for must recognize the carer is worried for them and must react to it rather than ignoring it. And by reaction, it means sort of, I guess, understanding and acknowledging this emotion. Second responsibility is to share aspirations, appraisals, and accomplishments. Sharing enables care to occur easily as the carer can contribute and help guide and actualize these goals. And the third is they have a responsibility to grow with the relationship. The cared for's ultimate ethical responsibility is to develop their own capacity for genuine caring relations. So now that we understand a relationship of care from two different agents' perspectives, let's go back to the trolley problem. In the trolley problem, it's clear that if you care for someone, you would want to preserve them in your caring relationship over the lives of five random people. If you lose the one close to you, you lose a part of yourself. You lose someone who completes you. In fact, Noddings, in her argument that care ethics isn't universal, claims that we are unable to form relationships of care with everyone and anyone. So no, you're not a piece of shit for choosing one person over five.